Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to another installment of MSP webinars. Today is the final webinar of the year. I know what a crazy year it's been. I'm sure you guys are probably like, holy cow, it's almost 2018. Todd, I know you're probably freaking out internally. Um, so as you see, I've got Todd Kane joining us again. Todd has evolved management consulting, and he does some really cool things to help managed service providers like us be better. So, if anyone has any questions or want to engage him outside of this, please feel free. I will put up a link to his website here shortly in the chat. Meanwhile, today we're going to talk about project management. Now, Todd, you have some pretty strong opinions on project management, right?
I do. Yeah.
That's good. I
Yes.
like strong opinions. I too have strong opinions. Just typically not on project management. It's more like, how much mayonnaise belongs in tuna salad and that type of stuff. I have those types of strong opinions. Project management, in my opinion, is just it's something you have to do when someone says, "Hey, I need XYZ project done." You just manage it. I don't understand. I mean, it's not hard. You just go in there and wing it, right?
That's usually what people do is end up winging it. Absolutely. And then they can't understand why the projects are late and the client is upset and everyone's stressed about the service not being delivered, and it ends up being a teeter-totter, right? You're either
Mm.
servicing the clients and doing reactive service really well, or you're ignoring all of the project funnel and making sure you're working on standardization with your clients, or you put a lot of attention to projects and then you're understaffed to provide the reactive support. So it often acts as either a major distraction for people, or in some cases it can cause a lot of business critical issues from a resourcing standpoint for sure.
Now, I'm really confused because you just said words that we don't like hearing in the managed services industry. You said reactive support. What is that?
So reactive support is your service desk. So someone phones and says, my computer is broken, or this thing doesn't work. That's the reactive. Then the proactive is more the knock stuff, uh, uh, back-end maintenance, centralized services approach, what you're doing from monitoring and health resolution. And then the third support stool would be, or the chair leg on the stool would be the project element. So it could be lumped into a proactive view, but it's scheduled work that usually has a fixed start and end date. And the easiest way that I define projects is something that takes more than 4 to 6 hours or requires multiple people to be involved. So
Hmm.
that's often quite confusing for people, is they're like, well, what's a project? They don't even, in some cases, they don't even treat onboarding as a project. And onboarding, in most cases, will take multiple days, if not weeks, to complete. So to not call that a project is a little crazy, especially because it has a start and an end date.
So when it comes to projects, like when you are sitting down with MSPs and saying, "Okay, you need to do this better," Um, there's different kinds of projects. There could be a website migration, website development, all the way up to a new server deployment for SMB with 20 users, or Exchange to Office 365 migration for SMB with 1,500 users. So, do you manage projects differently when the size or scope are like one end of the spectrum versus the other? Do you manage those the same way or differently?
Um, I would say a bit of both. So yes, you want at least the basics in place for all of them. So I see it kind of as like a maturity scale. So the 0 is just sort of like, hey, we have a project, somebody go do this, and we'll figure out the billing later. We'll figure out, if we actually did well on it, and I'll just sort of trust that you're going to go out and do great work. All the way up to, there's more formality around it. There's actual reporting. There's a statement of work. There's communication with the client. So in some of those cases, if it's deploying a new firewall, for example, that's a pretty easy piece of work. It's technically complicated, but it's not difficult to do as long as you schedule it and one person kind of has a frame of mind of what they're actually going to do. You can maybe deploy that in 2 to 6 hours, say. So that's an easy piece of work. It doesn't require project management necessarily, but still you should probably communicate with the client, set some expectations and agree upon what delivery looks like. Maybe there's some gotchas, certain ports that need to be managed on one side or the other after the migration, those types of things. So there's those basic elements of what are we doing here, who's responsible for it, and what does the pay structure look like? Is this a part of the contract or is this a separate billable item? Is it a fixed fee? Is it T&M? So there's a lot of those fundamentals that have to happen regardless of what the scale of the project is, all the way up to say an office move or a new site deployment where it's all brand new infrastructure, or worse, you're picking up old infrastructure and carrying it to a new site. Usually requires multiple people. You're involving multiple vendors, third-party contractors. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of high risk. So there has to be a lot more active communication, a lot more project management, and that increases the administrative effort that often people miss in scoping. Right. So it's a bit of both. Depending on the complexity of the work, then it probably requires more project management. In fact, I have a tool that I use for scoping a lot of these projects so that everyone, when different techs are scoping work, they actually agree on how much time something's going to take. And in that tool, it actually factors in the default amount of hours for project management. So it just says you expect this project to be X number of hours, and then it applies 15% project management as a default, right? And that helps to cover off that administrative effort of coordination and communication. So if it's a 4-hour piece of work and you have an hour or an hour and a half of project management, okay, cool. But it scales up a lot more. So if it's a 60-hour project, then you've got 10 or 12 hours of project management, right?
Now, I need to circle back a little bit because you mentioned something that I think a lot of people fail to do: communication.
Yes.
So, is there a point where you can have too much communication when it comes to a project?
Absolutely. It's very simple. So we'll start maybe with the basics. So the absolute basic element that I get people to subscribe to around project management is who does what by when. Those are your 3 basics for project delivery, right? And then it gets a lot more complicated if you have multiple people, you have multiple deliverables, and you have more complexity around administration and communication. But the communication of those 3 elements are absolutely critical. And if you're doing just a simple piece of work, you can say, Jim is going to deploy this firewall on Thursday, right? Okay, everyone understands that that's the case. Once that day actually comes, tell everyone that Jim is deploying that firewall today at this client site. And then after it's done, Jim has completed this work at this client for this firewall, and here's the updated documentation, right? So that's pretty straightforward versus...
No, stop right there real quick. When communicating, I think it's important that we communicate more than just, and I'm sure that you would normally, but I just want to spell things out for people. It's more than just, hey, Jim's going on site to deploy the firewall. It's Jim's going on site to deploy the firewall. He's going to be there from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Please expect internet outages during this time. And elaborate on that as you will. So that way you can set the expectations of, well, what do you mean the internet was out or is going to be out? Nobody told us that. Like, you need to make sure you set all of those expectations when communicating with people.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Expectations is the best defense for upset clients. It buys you that grace period in between. And again, it depends on the level of complexity. So your question was, can you have too much communication? There are cases where there's not complicated work, but it takes a lot of time. So if you're coordinating resources, relying on third-party contractors, and you have to do sort of step one, and then wait a few days, wait for someone else to do some work, step two, and then step three comes the week after that. And then 2 weeks later, we have to do some testing with the clients. And then a week after that, we roll out to maybe a production environment. So these things that take much a longer period of time, what you should be doing is at least weekly updating the client on the status of the project. And that can feel like a heavy effort. What I often encourage people to do is you do this as a web call or a phone call to update them. But that can often feel burdensome. So maybe it's too much communication to be meeting with them weekly to say, well, nothing's really changed since last week. All we're doing this week is waiting for that third-party contractor, right? So there is sort of this variable tempo that you have to find the sweet spot. What I usually encourage people to do is have at least a kickoff and a close meeting. So kicking off with the client saying, here's the SOW, this is the deliverables, this is the timeline, here's the person that's responsible for this, this is what we're doing and what we're not doing as a part of this scope. So that's really critical.
Why wouldn't you not be doing things?
Doing things or doing the kickoff?
You said here's what we will be doing, here's what we won't be doing. So can you give an example of things you wouldn't do?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good point, right? Maybe in the firewall example, or if it's a new office, then you're not the one that is pulling cable from the DMARC location, right? That's responsibility of a third-party contractor. So you get there, and it's an empty office, and no one has dropped any ports at any of the desks, and you're supposed to set up a network there. You're like, well, okay, there's a pretty big piece missed here, right? So in scope and out of scope are critically important. Say if you're deploying some software, training is potentially not something that's in the scope of the project. Not that you can't do it, but you have to be really clear about expectations, like you said, is setting expectations of what we are doing and what we are explicitly not doing, right? If you're migrating an old piece of software, you're not responsible for the licensing, either the acquisition or the maintenance of that third-party software. That's up to somebody else, right? If they want you to do it, then there's potentially more billable time that needs to be baked into that project. So just protecting the scope of what you're doing and what you're not doing. Your mic is out. Steve, can you hear me? There you go.
Fantastic pieces of insight. So it's not just saying, okay, so we're installing your server, but while we're here, we're not going to fix all of your end user printing issues. It's literally saying, because this is such a wide scope of work, this person is in charge of this, that person is in charge of that, those people are in charge of those. And if these things don't get done in a particular order, then the project is going to be off schedule, and I might not be able to complete my thing because the other things aren't done. And is that kind of what you meant by what you will do, what you won't do?
Yeah, or even something as simple as you go out to deploy, say, like a backup solution, and you get there, and for whatever reason there wasn't a lot of insight to the environment, and you find that there's all kinds of errors and stuff on the AD controller, and that is out of scope. You're not there to fix stuff. You're there to do a particular deployment. And what happens to a lot of field guys and project guys is they'll often show up to the office, and especially when it's a new client, there's not been maybe a lot of on-site, or the onboarding has been kind of a loosely approached, then people will sort of glob on to, hey, there's a tech here, and like, well, you're here, can you do X, X, and X? And in general,
that's so frustrating.
Saying no, right? Because it feels like poor service. They want to go over and above and help people out, and they're like, well, this isn't that hard, I can do this. And as soon as they say yes, and then find that they're
that opens
down
the door for everything else.
Yeah, then it's like, okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then at what point do you say no? So you have to be really explicit about, again, what's in scope and what's out of scope, and setting those expectations.
And you don't want to say yes to one person and be like, all right, I'll do this real quick for you, because you don't want to show favoritism. Mm-hmm. That's a real quick way to have the end users at your client hate you. So don't show favoritism. Don't go outside of scope. If you're there for a particular job, do the job and create tickets for everything that people approach you for.
Yeah.
And say, you know what, I'm going to create a ticket. This is obviously very important. I want one of our guys to work on this. Or if you're just a one-man shop, then I want to work on this, but I only have so much time allotted for me to do this. What would you do if what is there does not allow us to do the scope? Oh, so what do you do if they're missing an important piece of the puzzle? Is that what you mean, Jason? So that way you're not able to do what needs to be done. So if you're there to install a new router for their new internet connection and Spectrum or whoever hasn't come to install the internet, what do you do, Todd?
Out of scope, right? So if you're managing your own project, then potentially you call the account manager, the service manager, and say, the requirements were not met. This is another good reason to have that kickoff meeting and say, okay, we're coming out to do this installation of a piece of software. We need to have licensing on site. And you show up there and they're like, oh, I don't know. I think we installed this a few years ago, and Jane has the license somewhere, but it's like tucked away in a cabinet and no one has any idea what you're doing. You say, look, sorry, we're not responsible for the deployment of this. We don't have access to get this piece of software, so we're going to have to reschedule this, unfortunately. So if there's a time that works best for you, then let me know and I'll try and make that available. And if this is something that we can even do tomorrow, then great. I'm happy to come back and reschedule that, but I can't just sort of sit here and wait while you guys figure this stuff out. I don't know how long that's going to take, right?
So is there ever a point where, okay, let's say there's a software license tucked away in a cabinet, just like you said. Is there a time where you would say, okay, I'll give you 15 minutes if you can find it.
Oh,
if,
sure.
if now's not
Yeah.
a good time for you to go look, then we'll just reschedule. But if you can't find it after looking for a little bit, we'll just have to reschedule.
Yeah, I mean, be reasonable about it. It's like, okay, my checklist isn't met. I'm out of here, right? You're not being a jerk about it. And again, it depends on level of complexity. If they just can't find something and they have to spend even half an hour to do that, no big deal, right? Like it's not going to potentially blow the budget, and you don't want to present a poor service experience over something that's kind of minor. But if you, like with the other example, you show up to an office move and they didn't tell you that they didn't schedule movers and they're expecting you to carry the equipment from one office to the other, that's kind of a problem. But again, that's one of those situations that is really, really sensitive, because especially if this is pre-scheduled and it's out of scope, then what are you going to do when everyone's sort of looking at you like, okay, well, we have to do this and I'm now relying on you guys to do that. So maybe there's some situations where you have to make a judgment call where some portion of the work just becomes time and materials as an addition. So, in a more controlled fashion or something that's a little less time sensitive, it would be a change control. And people I find, are really, really leery of making change controls in a project. So essentially, for anyone that wouldn't know, change control is something that's out of scope that you're going to accept into the project, but it becomes an additional billable item, right? So if it's a fixed fee of, say, $1,200 worth of work, and you say, well, this is out of scope, but we're going to do it either as a T&M or we're tacking on another $800 to this project, that's change control. Okay, and one of my favorite photos around project management, you guys can probably dig this up on Google somewhere. It's a yacht with a dinghy pulled behind it, and the dinghy is named project, and the yacht is named change control, right? So, and it's not to say that you should soak people, but there's so much money to be made in the out of scope exceptions as long as they're managed properly and the client has a clear expectation of why there's an additional charge. There is sort of a cross sell or an upsell available from project delivery standpoint, as long as it's done in a coherent and high service fashion. Then it's not something that people should fear. It's just, they requested something that they didn't realize was not scoped as a part of this project. As long as they don't feel like they're being nickel and dimed around those things, then it's a good thing to do. There you go. Original contract and change order. There you go.
That's fun.
Yeah. Reasonably, that doesn't necessarily qualify to our industry, but the point is there. That's why I like the photo, is it just sort of demonstrates like don't rob yourself by just including a ton of work that was out of scope, which kind of leads to another portion of how you're actually managing projects, is monitor the profitability of the projects. If nothing else, just from an hours budget to actual, right? So going into a project, half the reason to write a statement of work and have a scope is to determine, I think that this work is going to take 20 hours. And then you go and do the project and it's at 35 hours of actual delivery. You need to reflect on why that is. Did someone just completely underscope something? Did the client ask for a bunch of stuff and you did a bunch of work that was out of the scope, right? You need to understand why those exceptions come in and why the actual is so much higher than the budget. That's critical to a good project delivery practice, right? And then you can kind of take those reflections and build those forward. It's why I like using that menu sheet around what are the expected times for deliverable, because you can kind of build it forward. So you can build this on your own, either using templates or just a spreadsheet, and you put in this piece of work is 5 hours, this piece of work is 10 hours, this piece of work is 2 hours, and you just add these things all together. And if you find that that's not the case consistently through, after you complete a couple of projects, you're like, oh, actually that was 12 hours, not 10 hours, then build it in and continue to develop that knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm. So, and I love this image that Ed just shared as well. I'm gonna share that too, because why not?
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
And I've seen various versions of it. I think we all have.
Mm-hmm.
But gosh, is that just fun? So when it comes to, I can't even think straight looking at this thing. It's amazing. When it comes to building out your scope, where do you begin? Like, walk us through. Let's say somebody wants you to do something that you've done a few times before. Maybe it's just a server installation or whatever. Where do you begin with building out your scope of work and estimating your time investment and all that good stuff?
Well, I would say certainly if you've done it a few times before, look at those previous projects. Hopefully you have some data to lift off of around what information you have available. So if you did this project before and it took about 20 hours, well, we'll start with 20 hours as a base, and then you'll still need a technical resource if you have a project architect, or just a tier 3 resource, or if it's just yourself that is scoping the stuff. Just look to your historicals and then add any exceptions that might be baked in there. And in a lot of cases you want to build the projects as fixed fee engagements, because it's easier to sell and it's potentially where you can increase your margins if you're getting the project delivery correct, right? So look towards what it took you last time. Make sure you're building in enough for that administrative buffer, maybe some contingency. So like I said, on that sheet that I use for building the project scope is 15% for project management, 10% for contingency. And those things can just be helpful in buffering things out depending on the complexity of the project. And just start there. As long as you're keeping that data and rolling it forward, then you should have something to lift off of the next time that you go and do that project, right?
Never done.
That's a tougher. So I mean, you can either take a swipe at it and treat it as a learning lesson. So potentially your margins are lower. In some cases, depending on complexity, maybe you pitch it as a time and materials project because you're not comfortable with what the actual fixed fee result would be. Or the better option I would suggest is doing a discovery first. So paid discovery. People often skip this step a lot, and it's where their project delivery margins get in trouble, is so much of the pre-sales portion is given away. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but just to do 4 to 8 hours of discovery to understand, how you're going to build a brand new hyper-converged infrastructure with a hybrid cloud strategy is not something you're just going to build off the side of the desk. There's a lot of complexity you need to understand in what's their current environment, what's their network fabric look like, what is the data center, what software are we using to integrate all of this stuff. It's not reasonable that someone's just going to sit down and spend 8 hours of free time to support the needs of scoping that project. So bill for the discovery in the cases that you need it, especially when there is high complexity and high risk and sort of low insight around what the delivery actually looks like.
Now, I know you said you are very passionate about project management.
Yes.
What I would like is for you to go on, I'm going to call it a patent pending Todd Kane rant and rave about project management. Tell us what you constantly see people doing wrong.
Okay.
And what we should do to fix it.
Yeah, so I often, like I said before, this is a more of a maturity spectrum. So there's the people kind of on the zero end of the scale that are doing a lot of things wrong, and then it moves up in this maturity chain, all the way up to kind of 0 to 5 on that maturity chain. And the issues that I see on the bottom are that projects is a means to an end, and it's not actually something that they're looking to make money on. So they say, well, the projects are just a necessity because we have to do this stuff, and we can't charge them for it because the client is really price sensitive, and we don't want to risk the contract. Meanwhile, if you look at sort of the overall take home and the margin associated with that client, you're probably tanking the service and not making either as much margin as you should, or in some cases you're potentially in the red because you're just giving away all of this work that is valuable, demonstrates value to the client, and actually can be sold at a premium price and produce a lot of margin. So for most MSPs, they should be looking at service contracts as the operational costs. This is what keeps the lights on. This is what makes the business run. But where you actually get these peaks of higher margin take home and higher dollar amounts to the bottom line are going to be the project delivery. This is why you actually want to develop a project funnel, and you should have, depending on the size of your staff and organization, number of companies, reasonably a 2-week backlog on project delivery. It's not unreasonable. And what that means is that you can actually dedicate project resources to the delivery of that stuff from a scheduling standpoint. And there's work that is consistently coming in the door on top of the MRR. The number that I've seen in the industry is 25% of your revenue should be non-recurrent revenue, so the NRR portion, which a large portion of that reasonably should be project delivery. So from just a financials standpoint, it's where people really miss the boat on making money is the project delivery. There's always going to be something around standardization or evergreening an environment. This is something you have to get good at in order to really make good money for your business. So that's kind of the most top level is how they treat projects and how they're viewed within the scope of the business is a big one. The other quote around projects that I absolutely love it's called Parkinson's Law, which is, I got the quote up here: work expands to fill the available time to its completion. Okay, so if you set no reasonable end dates, there's no hurry, and people will just naturally fill the amount of time that you're supposed to deliver something on. So what people often make a mistake in delegating as they're getting into more of the management of a team is they say, you need to do X for this client, and go out there and do that. Then 2 weeks later, that work is still somehow undone. And they're like, well, what's going on here? I asked you to do this. And they're like, well, I'm really busy and got distracted with this. And if you set no deliverable dates for this stuff, it will always take a back seat to whatever fire pops up through the course of the business. Because an MSP work style is so reactive, you need to be on top of scheduling and setting expectations for deliverables around this stuff. It's really, really critical. So if you're not setting reasonable timeframes, then the work will just expand to whatever time you've given it. And if you have no end date, then good luck. It's going to take as much time as you think someone might to deliver that stuff, or just whatever priority they want to put on it. So that's really critical. Statements of work is another one, just the base element portion. People need to get in the habit of writing a statement of work. And the complexity of that statement of work is variable. Again, if it's a 6-hour piece of work, a one-pager is fine. This is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing, and this is how much it's going to cost, and this is the expected deliverable. That's a good start. If it's a 4-week engagement, then reasonably the SOW should be a lot more complex, and you should put a lot more work into that. The other part on SOW is writing a SOW. It should be for a piece of work that you're very confident is actually going to be pulled forward. A SOW is not a sales document, right? So make sure that your team, especially the administrative, the operational team, understands the distinction between a proposal and a statement of work. Okay, proposal is budgetary. It's like, well, it's maybe 3 or 4 days of work, I think. And if you need to get to the next step of doing a discovery to actually better scope that work, then do that. But a SOW should be written for something that you're very confident that the client is actually going to pull forward, so that if you have a sales team, they're not leaning on the SOW as a sales document. It's more like contractual. It's more of an agreement around the terms of delivery. So that is really, really critical. The last piece I would say is just around scheduling. Like, projects have to be scheduled. And what I usually suggest to people is where they come from, the low end of the maturity scale, is they've got this one guy who's either the tier 3 or the projects/field guy. And he's awesome at what he does. And it's kind of like, well, we'll give it to him and he'll go out there and nail it. And that's okay. It gets you to a point, but very reasonably within hopefully your PSA, you're starting to schedule maybe 4-hour blocks for delivery, right? So projects broken up into a few tickets, schedule a 4-hour block here, 4-hour block there, 4-hour block here, 4-hour block there, for them to actually focus and spend time on that delivery. That really helps to, one, sort of define that deliverable of when do I expect this project to be completed, but also really helps them defend their time against other things that they might get sucked into from a reactive standpoint. And that can really increase their focus, right? This stuff often requires a little more dedicated time and attention, a few 2 hours to just kind of disappear and work on something versus you're trying to deliver a project. Meanwhile, you're getting shoulder tapped every 20 minutes because someone needs your help with something. It really leads to a lot of errors at the very least, and potentially a lot of stress, burnout, maybe some issues in the overall delivery of those projects. So it puts everything at risk. So I'll kind of pause there. That's the first portion of the rant, but I will gladly rant on other parts.
Came in late. I'm Steve. We have Todd joining us, and Todd is talking with us about project management. So, Todd, what do you think about MSPs that do the true all-you-can-eat, where they include projects as well in their managed services contract?
It is suicidal. It absolutely is. There's only one or two ways that works out. Is either one, you get burnt and you're sinking the profitability of that client by baking in too many projects, or what I tend to see more often is the client ends up really pissed off because they're not getting the deliverables that they're expecting. So it's okay to say, hey, I'm going to charge you a higher rate. It's all operations, everything's baked in. We're going to do a bunch of projects for you. 3 months later, you don't have the time to commit to it because you don't have the resources or the finances to support the delivery of those projects, and everything just ends up spread too thin and nothing really ever gets delivered. So I think it's absolutely suicidal to suggest that you would include projects. There are some cases where, in very, very unique cases, where this can make some sense. So if your delivery solution is so prescriptive that you know exactly what is the client delivery is going to look like over the course of a year. So you sell them a complete cloud solution and all of their infrastructure is hardware as a service. Okay, maybe, but that's a really, really limited use case for most people. That's probably 2 to 5% of the market of people that are doing that in that true has cloud fashion. So the expectation around are you going to be able to bill them enough to be able to build those projects in and get that delivery function to actually happen in a reasonable time is so risky that you'll end up broke or with very dissatisfied clients.
A month.
Yeah, so that's a bit different, like a bit of a proactive effort. So the one risk that I find with this is that you have to be fairly committed to probably your VCIO function and working on the standardization. So if you're essentially just chunking out time for what you would view as proactive measures, and that's probably fine. But that's different than you guys start from maturity level 0, and we're going to push you up to 3, and we're going to build all the projects around that. That's tough, because like, especially if you're looking at any type of capital expenses where they need additional hardware or they need to swap out devices or software for something else, and it gets really tricky. Are you then including hardware and licensing? Unless it's a part of that HAS model, it's really tough, right?
Between Errol, Matt, and Zach. So Zach says, 6-hour blocks per month in the contract. Errol says that's basically what we do for hardware as a service. And Errol also said, wanted to know if the 6 hours were project hours or if that's 6 hours of project and IT support. So I'll just clarify. Zach pretty much includes all you can eat on the operational side of the IT support. And then he includes a 6-hour block of project hours. And I remember this conversation before. If a customer says, I'm going to get, 30 new computers. Well, that's not a problem. I will install those computers for you 6 hours at a time each month. And I don't even know, Zach, will you do like additional blocks of time if they say, let's just do it all at once and get it over with? Or will you only do 6 hours a month of project work for that client? I only do Azure Connect, Gmail Sync, etc. type projects because it saves me time on the back end for adding and removing users. So, what are your thoughts on that type of stuff, Todd? Are you ever, how do I word this? Should you do a project that theoretically you should charge a customer for, but inevitably you're able to justify it because it's going to save you time over the course of the next couple of years of your existing agreement?
Yeah, so there are cases where this does make sense. This either becomes a owner discretionary or account manager discretionary direction. So for example, the MSP that I ran, we had several clients that they asked for Cadillac service. They wanted to pay a premium to just not see additional bills. They just hated working on the invoicing, and they trusted us to look after it, and they recognized that they paid a premium for that. So you can judge this based on the margin on the account. If the margin on the account is north of 60%, 70% in a lot of cases, you have to recognize what value you're presenting at that point, because they're obviously not over subscribing to you from a reactive standpoint. So reasonably, what can you build in? Right? You should definitely be working on the standardization stack. So, are you going through your checklist on the environment and making sure that they're compliant to all of the standards that you have for the client environments? All the best practices are implemented. They're upgraded on all of the software that they have rights to. They've fully deployed all of the software that they actually have available. Right? So you've sold them 365, but all they use is Outlook and Word. Okay. Have they looked at using Teams? Have you potentially set up OneDrive or SharePoint for use within the environment? So what additional value are you presenting, either from a standardization of the stack or fairly limited scope projects where you're quite confident that you're not going to blow that budget, right? So if you're just going out there and potentially doing some user training, maybe some security training, or you see that the accounting department is constantly asking these weird questions about how you use Excel for whatever reason. then go out there and spend some time with them. And that's where that project time can come in. I think that's totally reasonable. If you're not doing reactive support, you need to be very conscious about what proactive work you're doing. So however you build that in and scope it is critical, but that's where sort of that project stack delivery makes a lot of sense, working on in the environment sort of month to month and spending time there, not necessarily just doing break fix from a reactive standpoint, but actually progressing the environment forward.
No, I've got to say, I don't know about you, but if an accounting department is asking how to use Excel, I think there's a bigger issue with that
You'd be
client.
surprised. This is a big part of why I harp on people to set up type and subtype correctly. I'm a ConnectWise guy, and so that's where I've spent most of my life.
I'm so sorry.
I
kid.
Although I'm gonna have to get up to speed with Autotask with the data acquisition, so I think I'll pick your brain a little bit, Steve. But yeah, you'd be surprised on what you see from a type subtype issue, and maybe the accounting department hired someone that said that they were excellent with Office, but all that meant is that they haven't installed at home, and they've kind of spoofed something, right? So there are situations where you got to understand, is someone appropriate for the job, or do they need some training, and can you provide them some value around that, right? And that can be just a simple someone not using software correctly, all the way up to the top of recognizing, hey, client X doesn't have a CRM or a point of sale solution, and I should talk to the owner because this is something that we could help them out with, and it'd be a great piece of project, right? So again, just you're either providing value to the users or to the department managers, or you're looking at that business from the top down on how does technology actually integrate to your environment, and where are those project opportunities for us to provide value for you but get paid for it, right?
Now, I would love, we've got quite a few people attending here. I would love if you guys could just pop in some questions to the chat. Let us know what kind of questions you have, as far as is there something you could be doing more efficiently, or is this the right way, or anything like that. Johnny mentioned biggest MSP fail. So I don't know if he's asking you to breach confidentiality with your clients and tell us what MSP has had the biggest failure. Probably not. Or if if you can just say, based on your experience in working with all these MSPs, what's the biggest failure you keep seeing them make over and over, time and time?
Related to projects specifically, I guess we can get into the other stuff later, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, certainly around projects, I think what is the biggest issue?
I would think winging it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I was trying to figure out if there's something more specific, but I would say broadly it is winging it. There's no organization or plan, right? So I popped in a couple of blog posts that I have around this, and one of the first ones is 5 ways to measure your project management maturity. And the reason that I wrote that is exactly that, is that what you tend to see is people just sort of winging it, and they're coming from either a sole operator environment, or what I call more the consulting group, where you have a loose collection of really smart consultants, but it's not really an MSP yet. And it works well, but it's not scalable, right? And that there's sort of this maturity that you have to progress towards, where there's a limit to just saying we hire smart people and they're going to go do good work without a lot of direction. And where people tend to push back, certainly from a technical level, around the actual management of those projects to move away from winging it, is this classic pushback of, well, you want me to spend all this time in this tool and status updates and updating these tickets. Do you want me to do this, or do you want me to go out there and just do the work, right? And it's such a terrible, terrible crutch for people that the expectation of the company is that you're reporting on the work. So there's a great expression that work done and unreported is work undone, right? If it provides no value to anybody else beyond you, then it's kind of useless. So there has to be some accountability and reporting, certainly around the project work that you do. So the really basics, the basic mechanics of that PMO, of the kickoff, the communication, the close, and hopefully the documentation of that project, are the really key elements versus, Joe's Auto Body wants this project. Can you go do that? And that's the extent of their project management, right? And then every once in a while they're like, "Oh, did you ever finish that?" Like one, there's no reporting from the person that did it. Two, there's no follow up from the manager or the account manager around the delivery of that project. So there needs to be some level of formality, right?
And I would add, if you're going to start managing projects like that, and if you're using or if you're providing managed services, and I do little air quotes because, let's be honest, installing an RMM agent is not the same as providing managed services.
Agreed.
You have to configure that agent to do a whole bunch of things before you can really say you're providing proactive IT support. But that's a whole nother rant we can get into later if there's time.
Sure.
So if you're going to be doing all this stuff, have a proper system to help you, I don't know, professionally automate your systems.
Yeah, actually, that raises a good point as well, is especially because ConnectWise, its project module is clunky. I'll be absolutely the first to admit that it's not easy to maneuver around in. The ticket function and having to update things, it can be fairly complicated just to kind of update some fairly basic information in there. So often what people will ask is, well, can we use a separate project management tool, right? Because this one kind of sucks. So can we just use Asana or Airtable or something else, like a web-based tool, because it feels easier? Not recognizing that then you're creating silos of information and someone has to kind of go between back and forth. Like, you're now entering time over here and then someone has to update the tickets on this side. Creates all kinds of complication. So if I'm, as much as I love tools for an MSP business, I'm a huge advocate of limiting tool sprawl. So if you already have a PSA and it has a project module, use it. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad, unless you find a really great tool that actually has some level of API integration where it's seamless and the updates go back and forth. But start there, right? Like, even if the projects are a single ticket, the lower end maturity aspect of this, like for the really simple projects, the stuff that is just 4 to 8 hours in a single person, have a separate board, like call it a project board, and just use individual tickets for that delivery. You can set in like the estimated budget hours on it and it'll tell you the actuals. Then you can bill them separately. You can keep this really clean and simple, right? So there's absolutely ways to get around that and manage the projects without having it to be burdensome.
And if you hate the project management system so bad that you refuse to use it, go a step further. Make a service board for each project you're currently managing. That way you can create all of the different tickets as the little items or tasks or whatever you want to do. Anything to help you organize the project and have due dates on different items that need to be done. However, if you have a PSA, if you're using ConnectWise Autotask, I'm on Kaseya BMS, so that one counts too. And I'm sure there's a few others that I just don't know about. Try using the project management system. I know with Autotask, you can create. Let me see if I can bring one up real quick. You can create an Excel spreadsheet, which is a template for your Autotask projects. So here is a project that I've created. Let me get that open.
Yeah, and this is something that Matthew mentioned in the chat as well, is using work templates in ConnectWise. So I agree, similar to, I think, what you're pulling up here, Steve, is if you have canned stuff, things that you deliver fairly frequently, put them in a template, right? It automates things. The one part it doesn't necessarily address is I often get people confused around the use of tickets versus tasks within tickets, and then the phases. So it's kind of these levels of complexity and what actually works for you. Go ahead, Steve.
I sanitize these four squares here, but this is a project that I would go through with a few MSPs just to help them make sure that Autotask and AEM are at least set up to some basic level of usage. So this would just help me kind of go through and keep track of everything that needs to be done. And by creating it in Excel, you've got literally all of the fields that you need, and it just imports right into Autotask. And I think you can do this for ConnectWise too, right, Todd? I'm sure it's much more convoluted and has like 19 more steps, but in the end, it's like 15,000 times more awesome. So, but yeah, create projects, and then obviously, like, you change all these dates for the phases and starts and ends and all that stuff. You got to change all that stuff, but this will at least get everything in to Autotask for you, so that way you can have a more general idea of, all right, these are all the tasks we need to do, and let's start assigning these tasks to people within the organization or people within our client's organization if there are tasks that need to be completed by an owner or a manager. And you just keep organizing it more and more and more within Autotask.
Yep. I would say a couple of other things as well in the management of those projects. Set, at the very least, set a budget for the project overall, right? So how long do you expect this project to go? If it's just a ticket on a project board, then just set the budget hours on that ticket. If it's a project, set the budget hours on that project, and then to get more detailed, set budgets on each of the individual tickets. Because then it allows you in a postmortem or a close review of that project to determine were there certain parts of this project that went off the rails. So like maybe you have a ticket for build server, and it's an 8-hour budgeted ticket, and it took 20 hours. Like, hopefully someone looks at that and goes, what the hell happened here? There was a bunch of issues and the hardware failed and we had to RMA it and blah, 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 right? So understand why those individual portions are bloating, as well as the bloating on the project overall. And then just a quick tip on the ease of use from the project management piece is, don't click through, assign people, schedule people on an individual ticket basis. This drives me nuts when I see people trying to use the project management portal. It's part of why people think that it's actually difficult to use. Use the project dispatch portal, and you just grab the ticket, drag it onto someone's calendar, and use that for scheduling. It's way, way easier. Second portion is, in ConnectWise, if you look around, any of the columns that have the little gray square in the top right corner of the column are things that you can right click on the interface. So if you need to change the status of a bunch of tickets, just right click the status, or you need to change the resources, right click and assign somebody else to those tickets. So those little tips and tricks can be really helpful for people in kind of the tactics and mechanics of managing a ticketing tickets in the projects.
So Matt says he creates work plan templates for everything and assigns the tickets. Jason asked if I'm going to make, I assume when he said that, I assume he meant my Autotask project template that I have in Excel. He asked if I will make that available for download. It is available for download. It's on my patreon.com/Steve Taylor page. So you can check that out. Mike wants to know what you have to say about flat fees for projects. And I think I'll just recap and say, clients like those better. Clients love flat fees.
And you should too, because you're going to get higher margins, right? So a really good example of this is Office 365 migrations. So for example, some people can feel that this is a touch shady. I'll let you kind of make an ethical judgment on this, but if you bill a certain portion of time for the migration of the user data, and you use a tool internally to limit the amount of keyboard time that you actually have to spend doing that and automate it, that's the margin that you make up, right? So what are the parts that you can be more efficient in the delivery of the project? And the more times that you do them, you eke out those efficiencies, but generally still bill the same for that project because the work value is still the same. Right. So this is something that you, again, once you have a project management office, like someone that's actually responsible for the delivery and the management and the overall business process of those projects, this is something you can get really good at. And this is where you can push from, maybe if you're billing T&M, you're making 20, 30% on the time. But if you're actually billing flat fee projects and you're eking out efficiencies, then all of a sudden you're up to 60, 70% potential margin on those projects, right? So that's a huge one, is flat fees. Clients like them because they know how much to budget for it. They know how much that project is going to cost. And as long as they agree to the value of that project, then no big deal. And then that gives you the opportunity to create some efficiency within that project and eke out more margin.
You bill the client a flat rate of let's just call it 20 hours worth of labor. Okay. So we're gonna make easy math, $100 an hour, 20 hours, it's $2,000. You do not now play a game called how much money can I make? Okay. While it's fun in theory to say, okay, how quickly can I get this done to increase my margin so much that I can take my wife out for a really nice steak dinner? You're going to screw things up, especially if you don't have a PSA or a project actually being managed in a PSA. By rushing through things and trying to get things done as quickly and as cost effectively as possible, you're going to miss at least one step. And it's going to be a critical one. And you're going to have egg on your face when your client figures it out.
Yeah. And that's why I say this is a judgment portion, right? There are some people that they're not comfortable making high margins, right? So I talk a lot to clients and just in the industry about what the best in class margins are, because that's what is possible, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you have to achieve either. So if you're comfortable with 40, 50% or even 30% margin, great. If you're living a comfortable life and your clients are super happy, then good. But just recognize that you're potentially leaving money on the table. But that's not to say that you should then just go out there and gouge them because you can get away with it. I agree with you. It's a slippery slope. At some point, either you're going to get burnt because someone judges that you're soaking them for a project. They get a quote on another project and see that you're 50% higher for the same deliverables. It's a really risky game of chicken. So know what value you provide from those projects. Just one other portion. I tend to not tell clients in a fixed fee engagement how many hours are involved. It's kind of irrelevant. And this is a bit of a training method that you have to coach them towards, because people are so ingrained with seeing amount of work versus time. They actually want to see how much time you're going to spend on this. All they do is reverse the math and say X dollars per hour. Okay, here's this number. Well, okay, well, maybe if we get, Fred and our team internally to do this portion of the work, then we can reduce the project cost, right? So I find it a little dangerous to include the hours on a fixed fee project. If it's T&M, it's hourly, doesn't really matter. But if it's fixed fee, it doesn't matter. Like if you're getting the deliverables and the cost of the project is within reason, the time it takes is kind of a secondary notion. But again, like I said, that's a cultural training thing that you have to go through with the clients if you're starting to pitch that.
So Johnny says it's all expectation and perception, and I agree with that completely. You need to set the expectation of, okay, I'm going to charge you X dollars for this project, and all of this stuff is going to get done, and that's that. You're not going to worry about time. You're not going to worry about additional costs or anything. That's the price of the project. Just like if you want to go out and buy a car, you can't say, well, I'll just have I just won't put doors on the front. I'll just put it on the back where the kids are going to be. Like, like you just don't. Now, Jason said, I run into clients that. Now, are these actual clients or are these prospects, Jason? Because he said, I run into clients that get quotes for inferior service and compare it to mine. Then I let them go there, fall on their face before coming back to me.
So I'll comment on this one. I think it's a very common issue, especially around backup, right? People do not understand the difference in what different types of backup delivery are. So you'll see, you'll pitch them a DR type service where it's image based and it's potentially deduplicated. There's an hourly snapshot and a daily snapshot. And then they go out and they say, well, I can get this on Amazon backup for like $5 a month, right? Not recognizing it, it's a completely different solution. So I think part of this is education, and then the other half is just the maturity of the client. Like, are they trusting you and seeing the value that you provide in the solutions that you're pitching, or are they just looking for the lowest cost, right? If they're just looking for the lowest cost, I wouldn't fight tooth and nail for them as a client. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to get rid of them if they're decent, but you should be really wary that they don't see the value in the partnership.
And if they don't see the value in the partnership, that's usually more times than not because you're not showing them the value. And it could be that you're not presenting enough client-facing, deliverables each month or during a QBR or whatever, showing them everything that you're doing for them. It could be they don't understand all of the features and software and everything else, and they don't need to, but they don't understand like how much you are protecting them and keeping them up and running. Or it could be just because they're cheap and don't care. And because for example, I went into a car dealership. Now this is a car dealership in a part of Ohio that's like middle of nowhere. So there were not any big car dealerships for 30, 45 minutes. There aren't any IT companies in the car dealership's city. That's how middle of nowhere they are. But it's a fairly reasonable size Chevy dealership. They have 19 computer systems, and they are paying $17 per computer for managed services. And you know what that really means.
They installed an agent and that's it?
They're getting updates and antivirus, and that's it.
Hopefully.
Everything else. No, it's not all you can eat. Everything is a billable, 100 here, 100 there, whatever. And then they have a phone system that is 4 years old and it keeps having problems, and now they're running into issues where they don't have enough lines, so they need to get new cards installed into the phone system. So I went out and I said, look, here's what I recommend you do with the phone system. You're going to have to spend money on it one way or another. Why don't you stop spending money and losing money on this existing system and just get a VoIP system that works? I gave them a quote for that. And then we talked about getting true managed services, which wasn't 10 times as much, but it was significantly more. And I was basically saying, we need you guys to spend like $2,500 a month to have your computer network maintained correctly. And they didn't like that because, they had a million excuses for why, just because we sell $70,000 Corvettes doesn't mean we have all this money laying around. And they'll give you every excuse that they can. And I am not as smooth of a talker to be able to overcome all of these excuses. So I did not win that deal. However, sometimes you're just going to get cheap people. And if they're not seeing, if they're not seeing the value, more often than not, it's your fault. But sometimes you just get a cheap bastard.
Too true. I would say that this probably lends well towards how VCIO and the project portion fit together, because it kind of lends itself to kind of what you're talking about is how do you demonstrate value. I find that those cheap guys are the first ones to say, I didn't call you all last month, so why am I still paying you? And they don't recognize the stuff that goes behind the scenes. So like the maintenance, the alerting, the monitoring, and the stuff that you're actually doing invisibly behind the curtain. But it absolutely is a necessity to have some face time to spend with them. So it can be just in the factor of having like a field guy doing a site visit, wandering around, talking to the users, asking if they have any issues. But reasonably, you should be doing QBRs. And people struggle with the value of the QBRs because they go in and they just produce a bunch of technical gobbledygook that, for example, a car dealership owner, they don't know. Like, people have to remember that this is a service industry and that happens to be technical, not the other way around. People hire you because they don't know anything about computers. And if you go into them and try and explain to them like what you do from a technical perspective, you make them feel little, that they don't know what you're talking about, and they feel like they're out of their depth and they get uncomfortable, right? So it's not in your best interest to generally try and educate people. You want to meet them at their level and talk about how technology suits their business. And one of the best ways that I find to do this, like if you have no QBR process and you're really struggling to get it off the ground, put together an Excel spreadsheet. You can Google around for this for IT budgets, and just put a bunch of line items. So like hardware refresh, like let's assume you're doing evergreen, 25% of your machines are being replaced every 3 years or every year, that type of thing. Okay, so as a simple example, then what do you pay the ISP? What is your contract cost? How many projects do you do? Software renewals, telephones, and just like list off a bunch of these line items and present that in the first QBR with someone and say, you can start the conversation with, how much do you spend on IT? What's your IT budget? And 9 times out of 10, the SMBs don't have one. It's purely reactive spending. So all of a sudden you put this Excel spreadsheet in front of them and say, well, let's calculate it. Let's figure out what your budget actually is. Tell me how much you spent last year and what you spent on that. Then we'll build this out and start from there. That is the type of value that really resonates with people. They're like, holy crap, okay, well now we're not reactively spending. We actually have an IT budget. This is great. And then the secondary portion to that is then you can start to help them budget for the projects that are required, right? So within the first year, I'd like to do these 3 high criticality projects. I'd like to start with this one because your backup's terrible and it's presenting risk to your business. So therefore, we need to schedule this project in the next 2 months. And keep in mind that there's budgetary cycles for larger organizations. What often happens with owners and sort of inexperienced AMs or salespeople is they'll go to a client with a project pitch and they'll say they said no, they don't want to spend the money. But really what happened behind the scenes is that they don't have the money right now. But if you tell them, what's your budgetary cycle? Can we fit this into next year's budget, which is being written up in 4 months? Then come back to them and talk to them in 3 months and say, hey, we talked about this project. Let's get that into the budget for next year. No problem, right? So always be thinking about that cadence of communication and being in front of the client around what is the continuum, this tech roadmap that you want to build for the client, and making sure that you're keeping them accountable to that from a business perspective. That will go a long way versus just showing up and say, so last month we caught 4,000 viruses and we spam filtered 10,000 messages and we did a bunch of critical updates. They're like,
they don't care. They don't. They have no desire to know how many freaking spam emails you caught, prevented them from reading.
That stuff used to be valuable a long time ago when people were like, oh, wicked, look, you're doing all this stuff for us. Now people just don't care. So
that's also back when people used to say things like, oh, wicked. I swear it's what it sounded like you said anyway. We're off track because we're not even talking about projects anymore. And what's funny though is I find our webinars always kind of towards the end we drift and we end up doing a few things or maybe just a couple of these few things. We complain about clients. We complain about other IT companies that are doing things wrong and costing us lots of money and making us look bad. We complain about not understanding pricing, and we figure out what our MM tool and everything else. Like, we're like, oh, what do you use for this? What do you use for that? So I'm going to say this. Next year, one of the first webinars that I do is actually not going to be a webinar. It's going to be a roundtable. We're all going to be able to sit down, get on cam mic. It's going to be in a Zoom room, Johnny. You're going to be really excited. It's going to be in Zoom, okay? We'll all be able to get on cam and mic, and we're all just going to talk. We're going to have conversations about stuff, about business, about all the things that people always end up wanting to talk about, okay? So we're going to do that. All right. Now, I feel like we've talked quite a bit about projects. Is there anything else you want to add on projects, Todd? When it comes to...
Let me check here.
And while he's looking, for those of you that might have missed it, Todd put a couple of links in the chat here to 2 different blog posts. If you guys have never been to his website, Evolved Management, but it's mgmt.com, go check it out. He's got a really fantastic blog on there. You guys are going to learn something, and he's just an awesome guy. I really appreciate you doing this with me, Todd.
No, it's fun. I like it. Okay, a couple of things. Where to go? So one of the things that drives me crazy about project management or project meetings when I see them happening, either with a client or the internal meetings where they just get updates on the projects, is it's a collection of status updates. And nothing makes me cringe more than when you have maybe a project manager or just a manager and the tech and a client. So those 3 people sitting on a phone call to update on a project. And the project manager is being updated by the tech in real time with the client on the phone. Terrible. It's such a waste of time for everybody, right? So and the same thing happens in these internal project meetings is people want to sit down and hear the stories about what's happened with the projects. And so they just sit in this round table and they're like, all right, Johnny, how's your projects going this week? And what can you tell us? Because A, they probably not updated anything in the tool, so it's not self-serve, and B, no one's communicated about all of this stuff beforehand, right? So just that the mode of communication is really poor from a project management standpoint. It should be the onus of either the project manager and or the techs to be updating all of the relevant parties in line with the project. Can just be a simple email saying, hey, here's a quick update. Status of the project is green. These are the deliverables that we've completed this week, and this is what we have scheduled for next week. Just the simple fact of keeping the client in the loop is super, super valuable. What I'll often suggest for people is that weekly communication is a phone call, and you at least start with the first one, and then the client kind of peels off because they're like, man, I'm not really getting a lot of value out of this. I trust that you guys are going to do that, but still continue to send them a weekly email after the fact, right? So just that mode of communication, it's no different than managing tickets. That if you're not updating a ticket and letting someone know that there's activity happening, then they tend to get a little frustrated thinking that things have just gone into a black hole. Same thing for projects, and often there's a lot more risk because there's money there's actual spend happening around those projects. And then finally, I would say at the end of one of these blog posts, I say set goals, measure performance, make plans for improvement, repeat. Right, that's how you build your project management framework. Is the same way that you build any other portion of the business. Is use data, use the data to improve, and continue to refine your process and look for improvements. And you don't have to, go out and buy fancy software or spend a bunch of money on training. A lot of people look towards, well, should I go get a PMP? No, you don't need a PMP. Half of the really effective project managers that I've seen in the industry are not PMPs. It's just good process, good communication, and good collaboration. That's what makes projects successful. So don't overthink it. Just set goals and work towards some improvement and measure it, right?
Shiva asked if Todd, if you do MSA review, I'm not asking if you will review an MSP's managed services agreement or if you review the agreement with your customers.
Well, technically, I would do both. So the way that
he wants you to review his managed service agreement for holes.
Yeah, potentially. I would probably look at that from a workshop engagement. So I'll do kind of one-day workshops with people where we just deep dive. I've got this huge spider web of all the different departments, operations, management, leadership, transferability, sales, marketing, service delivery, projects, procurement, all of the sort of the different elements of the service. So if there's a particular focus that people want to look at through those workshops, then I'm happy to do that. I've got a bunch of reference MSAs as well. I would say at the same time, don't lean too much on the legal around the MSA unless you're getting into something that is contractually based more around like hardware, like where there's legal and financial commitments. That's where it really starts to matter. Beyond that, the MSA, as long as it's been vetted by a lawyer, then it's generally pretty good. And if you think that it has to be defensible in court, then you're probably overthinking it. I don't know a lot of people that will go to court around something that has some principle around the agreement. I know, I think Shiva does 3-year agreements as well, so that could be potentially a bit more of a risk around that.
I think if Shiva could do 30-year agreements, he would.
Yeah, and I've seen some very unhappy marriages in those situations where there was a 3-year agreement and there was some hardware built into that agreement. So neither party really likes each other. In fact, they're using a third party to do some of the work because they actually don't want to deal with the person that they're contractually obligated to, but they won't leave because they don't want to pay the payout, right? So some of the more successful companies I've seen are starting to lean more towards those 30-day cycles where you have to keep them happy and there's a partnership and the value is seen there. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a tight MSA so that there's at least clarity around expectations. Yeah. Says,
I wish there was like just we see template MSAs all the time.
Yeah.
But I wish there was a nice template that's in like plain English. I just because if I can't understand my MSA, why should I expect my client to understand my MSA?
Well, I think like Ernest had that one where it was like the clean language MSA for some vendor or something, but then like it's not specific enough to use as a contractual engagement, right? So this is another part. Again, we're drifting, but it's okay. There's a big distinction between the contract and the proposal, right? So the proposal can be a lot more clean language, setting expectations. This is what we do, what we don't do. These are our SLAs. What's the level of risk? What do the backup cycles look like? That type of stuff. The contract is much more about force majeure, termination agreements, billing cycles, NDA, those types of things. It's more the legalese, right?
It's based on a handshake these days. I mean,
you absolutely can. I still know people that don't have MSAs in play or MSA in place, and they just base it on a 30-day handshake agreement. I mean, it certainly has its risks. I wouldn't do it personally, but it does exist out there. Absolutely.
Let's see, what other ridiculous questions can I ask you?
Shoot, I hear them all day.
Especially on Discord, right? Or on Slack. All right, so I think that might be everything. Errol wants to know if you're offering project management as a service.
Me personally?
Yeah, sure.
It's part of what I do in some of the engagements that I'm in. So technically, I kind of refer to myself as a virtual COO. And part of that is I'll sometimes play the development of the project management office, right? So I'm either training the service manager or the project manager around, how do you do your job better? So I'll sit with them in the meetings, coach them, give them some feedback on what they're doing, what they're not doing, provide them, some materials from this treasure trove of stuff that I have collected, and just sort of prop them up and develop them for their own success, right? So that and I play that role sometimes in projects, sometimes in the service manager, often with the executive, sometimes with the salespeople. I can spend a lot of expertise in different areas depending on what the needs of the organization are. So yes, technically.
I think we have. I think we have answered everyone's question. I see Jason wants to know if there's an audio only version. I assume he means of this webinar. I can tell you that the webinar will be uploaded to YouTube. I've had 3 people now ask me for a podcast. I do have a goal set to move forward with a podcast. If I meet that goal, and I think I might even lower the goal, lower expectations for you guys to get it, okay? If I meet that goal on Patreon, then I will make a podcast. Okay. So Todd, I want to thank you for hopping in here. I really appreciate you. You are a super smart guy. I really like and respect you, and anytime you have a chance to come into one of my webinars, you're always welcome.
I appreciate it. I really appreciate you offering these. I think it's super, super valuable. So I'm happy to participate. My course in my business is just to make people better leaders and better business managers. So that's this is great. If I can provide that just to put a little knowledge out there and give something for people to chew on, then that's awesome. So I appreciate the community. It's been great.
Excellent. So I just want to touch on a few things real quick, and then we will be done for the day. So first, I just want to remind you guys, this is the last webinar for 2017. What an awesome year this has been. This is, obviously the first year I've done MSP webinars, and I've learned a lot as I have been doing this. I started out using just a Zoom chat room, and someone drew a penis. I'll just come out and say it. Someone drew a penis using the annotate feature on the screen. So then I moved to Zoom webinars, and then I moved to this, and so here we are. And I've got quite a few people saying they don't like this system, Demio, and I don't know what to do. I'm torn. I really like Demio because it makes my life a lot easier. But if you guys aren't happy, then I guess you guys are kind of the customers. So
have you put out a vote?
Yeah, maybe I'll put out a vote. It'll be like the ones in Russia.
Sort of. The people voted. They're with me.
Yeah, the people voted. They chose Demio. It was fantastic. It was so good. All right, so for those of you that saw, Patreon put out an email a week or two ago saying, "Hey, good news! We're going to start giving you, the creator, more money, and we're doing that because we're not going to charge you credit card fees anymore." This is awesome, and the reason they were going to do that is because they were going to start charging you, the people that give the creators money. They're going to start charging you the credit card fees. And that made me pretty upset. That made you guys pretty upset. I actually lost some patrons because I wouldn't want to spend $1.50 when I was only giving you $1. Like that's a big increase, So Patreon said, oops, and they took it all back. They're not going to make those changes. The reason they did that, which I can appreciate, the reason they did that is Todd, I don't know if you're a patron or not. I really don't try and monitor who's doing that.
I am.
But let's say Todd signs up to be a patron today. He doesn't pay until the 1st. So he can sign up today, get access to all that sweet bonus content I've got up on Patreon, cancel on the 31st, and he doesn't get his card swiped. So that's what Patreon was trying to help do, was trying to help me with people that do that. But I would like to think, I don't think I've had anyone do that. There might have been one or two, and it is what it is. I trust that the MSP community will help me continue to make this bigger and better, and that you guys want this to grow, because it's all about you in the end. So I am going to evaluate if I go back to Zoom, because that's what's going to make you happy. I am going to evaluate that. We are going to have some really cool webinars in 2018. So I did mention we're going to do a little powwow. We're going to have a roundtable. We are going to have a HIPAA webinar in January. We're going to have one for Autotask Endpoint Management. Matej said he wants to come back. And I'm getting the kinks worked out to have the Kaseya Tech Talk that we had originally planned for a few months back. I think we're going to make that happen in January or February as well. So we've got some awesome things coming up. I do hope you guys enjoy Christmas, Hanukkah, or any other holidays you guys have coming up. And I will see you all after the new year. Thanks so much for an awesome 2017. And you have a great day. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Todd.